My name is Peyton Ward, and this morning I stood at the far end of Harbor Lane watching blue and red wash over snow like a breathing wound. The SUVs were unmarked, the uniforms weren't. Military police fanned out with a precision I knew by muscle memory, while agents from the Coast Guard's investigative unit climbed my front steps like they owned the tempo of the day. 5 days ago, I was still at sea, salt dried into the seams of my jacket, when a text from my father came through a fading signal. Don't come home for Christmas. Things have changed. I didn't argue. I opened my banking app. The numbers said more than he ever would. Now, a lead agent lifted a gloved hand, and the whole street seemed to hold its breath. Neighbors cracked their doors. Someone whispered my name. Through the window, I saw my father freeze, a coffee mug tilting until a dark thread ran down porcelain and disappeared. People think revenge looks like shouting. They never talk about the kind where you don't move at all. I kept my hands in my coat pockets and watched the porch where my flag bracket sat empty. The wood around it a paler square where sun used to bless it. I didn't come to knock. I came to listen to the law knock for me. And when the first boot cleared my threshold, I understood that whatever change started here, not with him, but with me. By the time I cleared the harbor road and turned onto Harbor Lane, my mind had already traced every step from the curb to the porch. The house sat where it always had, shingles darkened by salt air, porch rail leaning just slightly to the left. It should have felt like an arrival. Instead, it felt like a test I already knew I'd fail. I parked at the far end of the block, engine ticking in the cold. From there, I could see the wreath I'd hung last December was gone. The flag bracket was still bolted to the post, but bare, a pale square of wood showing where sunlight once kissed the fabric. The welcome mat wasn't mine, either flowery cursive that read "Home Sweet Home," like a joke I hadn't been invited in on. My key stopped at the first turn. New locks. The door swung open before I could knock. She filled the frame first, his new wife's soft sweater, sharp eyes, and a smile that didn't try to hide its edge. My father stood behind her, coffee mug in hand, steam curling into the cold between us. "You don't live here anymore," he said, each word clipped, like he'd rehearsed them. "We need the space." I looked past them, scanning for something familiar. The quilt chest my grandmother gave me was shoved against the opposite wall. Boxes I'd never seen sat open, spilling clothes that weren't mine. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon candles, masking something sour. "I'll get my documents," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You don't have anything here," she replied before he could speak. "We cleaned. Storage took the rest." He didn't contradict her. I turned without another word. Boots thudding on the porch boards I'd meant to replace last summer. Each step back to the street felt heavier, the cold biting harder. I didn't look over my shoulder. Rage was a current I couldn't afford to wade into. At the car, I sat until the tremor left my hands. Then I drove to base housing and pulled the black hard case from under my bed. Inside were the copies of everything that mattered: the deed, the mortgage, the insurance binder, the joint account records. On top, I placed my phone, its camera still holding the image I'd taken minutes earlier, an empty flag bracket, the shadow of what used to be. It wasn't just a picture, it was proof, and I knew exactly who needed to see it. I took the photo again, zooming in on the pale outline where the flag used to hang. It wasn't evidence in the legal sense, not yet, but I knew what it meant. In my world, symbols matter. They tell you who belongs. That empty bracket was the first warning that I'd been erased. The next morning, I drove to Harbor Brew, the only place in town where you could sit for hours and no one would ask why. The smell of espresso and baked cinnamon wrapped around me. But it didn't settle anything. Jack Renner spotted me before I reached the counter. He'd traded marine fatigues for an apron years ago, but the limp in his left leg still told his story. "Ward," he said, sliding a mug toward me. "You look like someone's about to make a very big mistake." "My father," I said simply. "While I was deployed, he drained the joint account, every paycheck, moved into my house, changed the locks." Jack set the coffee pot down with a quiet thud. "You're telling me he took your pay while you were active duty?" I nodded. "That's not just wrong," he said. "That's a federal offense." The word federal landed like a steel plate. I'd been thinking of this as personal a betrayal that lived in our bloodline, but hearing him name it changed the frame. You remember Lucas Keene? Jack asked. CGIS? You worked with him on that smuggling case off Barrow Point. I remembered how Keene's questions were like sonar, mapping truths you didn't know you were carrying. 2 years ago, I thought I'd never need that number he'd given me. Jack leaned closer. This isn't a local cop job. You hand Keene proof. He'll walk right up to your father's door, and he won't knock like you would. That night, I cleared my kitchen table, set the black case on top, and opened it like a weapon I'd kept oiled. Deed, mortgage, bank statements showing each deployment deposit, withdrawal slips, all signed with my father's hand. The text telling me not to come home. The photo of the empty bracket. I wrote the email in the same tone I'd use for a mission report, facts only. No adjectives. The subject line read, "Suspected financial exploitation of active duty service member." Before I could think myself into hesitation, I hit send. The whoosh of it leaving was louder than it should have been. The reply came faster than I expected, less than an hour after I sent the email. Keene didn't waste words. Received. Reviewing documents. Will advise. Do not engage directly. That last sentence told me more than the rest. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be slow. I went through the motions the next day at base housing morning PT. Briefing. Checking inventory, but my head wasn't in any of it. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected his name to appear again. By noon, it did. Confirming primary residence address. Be available by phone tonight. I read it 3 times, committing the rhythm of those words to memory. Keene wasn't asking for permission. He was setting a clock. That evening, the sun bled out over the harbor, staining the water the same rust red as the old dock pilings. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off, watching the shadows crawl up the wall. Waiting has a weight to it. Hours stretch and twist until they don't feel like yours anymore. The phone rang at 21:07. "We're moving," Keene said, his voice low but clear. "We have enough for a warrant. Financial records, corroborated with your deployment status. There's probable cause for unlawful eviction and misappropriation of military pay. We'll execute in the morning. You want to be present?" My throat tightened. The part of me that wanted to watch it happen was loud, but another part, the one that still remembered birthdays around that table, hesitated. "I'll be there," I said. He gave me the time and told me where to park so I wouldn't interfere. Then he hung up. No goodbyes. Sleep didn't come. I lay on top of the blankets, fully dressed, boots on the floor, until the first light of morning brushed the blinds. At 07:45, I drove the back route into Harbor Lane, pulling into a side street where I could see the porch. 2 unmarked SUVs rolled in at 08:03. Doors opened. Jackets with bold yellow letters stepped out, their formation clean and quiet. From where I sat, I saw my father open the door. He was still holding a mug, like the day before, but this time he didn't finish his sentence before they showed him the warrant. The moment had started, and there was no taking it back. From my vantage point, I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the cadence official clipped, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Keene stood slightly to the side, letting the uniformed agents handle the reading. My father's face went through 3 changes in the span of a breath: irritation, confusion, and then the slow slide into recognition. He looked past the agents once, scanning the street. His eyes didn't find me. My car was half hidden behind a delivery van, but I recognized the searching. He was looking for the one person who could have set this in motion. The agent stepped inside. The new wife appeared in the doorway behind him, her robe cinched tight, one hand pressed against her mouth. They disappeared from view for several minutes. And when they emerged, my father was holding a small cardboard box just big enough for documents. A phone, maybe a wallet. Not the image he'd ever imagined for himself. Keene followed him down the steps, speaking low. My father shook his head once, sharply, the way he used to when he wanted to end an argument before it began. This time, it didn't end anything. 2 agents flanked him, guiding him toward the SUV. I stayed still until the door shut and the engine rolled away. Only then did I start the car and pull out, keeping my distance. I wasn't following to gloat. I needed to know where they'd take him county first, then likely transfer. At the intersection by the marina, the SUVs turned right toward the federal building. I turned left, heading back to base housing. My hands were steady on the wheel, but there was a hollow somewhere under my ribs. Back inside my apartment, I set the black case on the table again. Everything was still there: deed, mortgage, statements. Proof, intact. But the photo of the empty bracket caught my eye. That piece of metal, that bare square of wood, had been enough to tell me the truth before anyone else did. It was the signal that something had shifted, that a line had been crossed and couldn't be uncrossed. Keene texted me an hour later, in custody. "You'll be contacted about restitution proceedings." I typed back a simple "understood," "no thank you," no victory lap. Just the acknowledgement that the next chapter would be about repairing what could be repaired and accepting what couldn't. The day after his arrest, Harbor Lane was quieter than I'd ever known it. No lawnmower hum, no screen doors banging, just the wind pushing through the gaps in the fences. Word travels differently in small towns, faster, sharper, and without mercy. I went back to the property mid-morning, not to step inside, but to see it with my own eyes. The locks had been replaced again, this time with bright brass cylinders that still smelled of machine oil. A printed notice was taped to the glass property under federal investigation. Unauthorized entry prohibited. It wasn't the home I'd left years ago. The siding needed paint. The roses my mother had planted were choked with weeds, and that empty bracket still clung to the porch beam, a silent witness to everything that had unfolded. "Mrs. Harkins from across the street came out, cardigan pulled tight despite the sunlight. She stopped halfway down her walk, studying me like she was deciding whether to speak. "I heard you were overseas when it happened," she said finally. I nodded. I was. She hesitated, then added, "Your father told people you signed it over to him, said you didn't want the responsibility." The lie sat between us like a bad smell. I didn't bother correcting her. The paperwork in the federal building would do that for me soon enough. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop to an email from a legal officer with the Judge Advocate General's Corps. They'd been looped in by Keene military pay misappropriation. Was their jurisdiction too? The message was formal, but the subtext was clear: they would pursue restitution aggressively, and I wouldn't have to fight it alone. For the first time in weeks, I let myself lean back in my chair and close my eyes. Not in relief, there was still a court process ahead, but in the knowledge that the weight wasn't mine to carry anymore. That evening, as the harbor lights flickered on, I deleted my father's number from my phone, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say that could matter more than what was already in motion. The door had closed, and I wasn't going to be the one to open it again. 3 months later, I walked into the federal courthouse in downtown Portland. The air inside had that dry, recycled chill that seeps into your sleeves no matter how tightly you button them. Rows of wooden benches stretched toward the front, where the seal of the United States hung above the judge's bench like a silent command for truth. I hadn't planned to sit in the front, but Keene motioned me forward when he saw me. "You're the complainant," he said quietly. "You get the right view." When they brought my father in, I almost didn't recognize him. The tailored suits and crisp collared shirts were gone, replaced by a county-issued uniform that drained the color from his skin. He didn't look at me. Maybe he couldn't. The prosecutor began laying out the case dates of my deployment, the property transfer filed in my absence, the sudden withdrawal of funds from my military account. Each exhibit was a nail, and the steady hammering of fact after fact filled the room with a rhythm I couldn't ignore. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand and placed my hand on the Bible. The oath felt heavier than I'd imagined, not because I feared lying, but because the truth had the weight of years behind it. I spoke of the day I'd returned to find my home emptied, the bracket where the flag used to hang, the notice taped to the door. I kept my voice steady. Even when describing the moment, I realized my father had been the one to strip it all away. The defense tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, an informal agreement between family members, but the paper trail was too clean, too intentional. By the end of the day, the judge's expression left little doubt about where the decision was heading. He set a date for sentencing and ordered the property restored to my name pending resolution. Outside, the cold air hit me like a wave. Keene was waiting near the steps. "You did exactly what you needed to," he said. I didn't reply right away. I was staring at the flag flying above the courthouse, its edges snapping in the wind. For the first time in years, I felt like the ground under my feet belonged to me again. Sentencing day came with a sky the color of pewter and rain that refused to commit, hanging in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. I sat in the same spot as before, hands folded, eyes fixed on the bench. The judge didn't waste words. He outlined the conviction: fraud, forgery, misappropriation of federal funds, and then delivered the sentence: 5 years in federal prison, restitution in full, and a permanent bar from managing or accessing my accounts. My father nodded once, jaw tight, as if agreeing to a business deal rather than hearing the terms of his confinement. When the gavel fell, the room emptied quickly. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the sound of footsteps fade. There was no triumph in me, only the quiet understanding that what had been broken could not be put back in its original shape. Keene walked me out into the damp air. The courthouse flag was still there, moving against the gray sky. And for a fleeting second, I saw the empty bracket on my old porch in its place, a reminder of where this began. Back home. I unlocked the front door to my reclaimed house. The air smelled of fresh paint and sawdust from the repairs. I set my bag down and walked to the porch. The new flag bracket gleamed in the afternoon light. I slid the pole into place, tightened the screw, and stepped back as the fabric caught the wind. It didn't erase what had happened, but it marked something new. This was mine again. Not because I'd inherited it or been gifted it, but because I'd fought for it when no one else would. The phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from a number I didn't recognize. I deleted it without reading. Some doors stay closed for a reason. The weeks after sentencing moved differently, slower, but lighter. I no longer checked over my shoulder or waited for another letter taped to a door that wasn't mine. The house felt lived in again, even on quiet mornings when the only sound was the flag outside catching the wind. I didn't invite people over to celebrate. There was no party, no champagne. Justice isn't something you toast to. It's something you carry forward. And I carried it in the way I walked through my own front door without hesitation, in the way I paid the bills from my own account without fear of someone reaching in to take what wasn't theirs. Sometimes, late at night, I'd pass the bracket on the porch and run my hand over the metal, feeling the cold bite of it. It reminded me of loss, but also of what I'd refused to surrender. My father's absence was a shadow I chose not to chase. Some wounds heal best when left untouched, their lessons etched deeper than any scar. I had my home. I had my name back. And as the flag outside shifted in the evening air, I knew I'd built something no one could steal again, not with a signature, not with a lie, not in this lifetime.